Hi everybody. I find this week's discussion to be particularly interesting on lying because most of us are brought up to believe that we should not lie. However, as you've read through the chapter, you've probably recognized that it's a little bit more complicated than that. Throughout history, we have definitely seen evidence that we should not lie, cheat, steal, or break promises. And this would be the predominant view held by non-consequentialists, particularly rule non-consequentialists. Kant is perhaps one of the most controversial people on lying because he says that we should not lie under any circumstances. We should not cheat, steal, or break promises because we cannot turn this into a universal theory. We cannot say that at some point it would be good to do these things, and that would break the very nature of making promises, cheating, or truth-telling. So Kant takes a pretty radical position, and if you want to do a little extra research on Kant, I think you'll find that philosophers argue that Kant would not permit lying under any circumstances, and that includes whether or not harm would come to a person if they told the truth. So what I'm saying here is that Kant takes this radical position that even if there was a murderer standing at your door asking perhaps where the person is that they wanted to kill, you would not be able to lie to them. Now this is a pretty extreme position, and a lot of philosophers will argue that yes, this is indeed what Kant meant. But there are philosophers that argue against this idea and believe that Kant did not mean to take it to these extremes. So it's kind of interesting to look into the history of Kantian philosophy. Some other proponents throughout history that have suggested that we should not lie, cheat, steal, or break promises under any circumstances would be St. Augustine, Sir William David Ross, and also John Wesley. Now, an active non-consequentialist would take a different viewpoint, and so that's why they were not included in the initial conversation of non-consequentialist lying and belief systems. They would take a stand depending on whether or not they felt like it. So if this is an intuitively based position, then they could be for or against lying, cheating, stealing, or breaking promises, depending on how it feels to them. So sometimes it might feel like the best thing to do, and they might lie or cheat, etc. On other occasions, it might not feel like the best option, and so they could take the opposite stance. So they're more in the realm of what a consequentialist would do. A consequentialist also might take either side, sometimes being in favor and sometimes being against lying, cheating, stealing, or breaking promises. And that would be largely dependent on the consequences of what will happen if lying is done, cheating is done, etc. As you can see if you read the case study on Barbara and her abusive husband, this is definitely a situation where lying would be a good idea. The neighbor is trying to determine whether or not she should lie to the husband and tell him where Barbara and the kids have gone, and it would be most likely that she would think of the consequences if she told the truth. And those consequences might end up with Barbara's safety in jeopardy and her children's safety, and also any other women and children at the shelter that she goes to. So this would be a case in which the consequences would state that lying would be the morally ethical choice. Now, rule consequentialists could also argue either for or against lying, cheating, stealing, and breaking promises. They would most likely start with the rule that these things are wrong, but then they would have to make exceptions depending on the situation. And as you probably surmised, an ethical egoist would believe in lying if it was in their best interest, or cheating, or stealing, or breaking a promise. They would simply be considering what would be the best for them at that time in the particular circumstance. So I hope that you enjoyed this brief lecture on the different ethical theories in the situation of lying, cheating, stealing, and breaking promises. And I look forward to seeing how you apply this to the rest of the week. See you in the discussion area.